Mughals have remained a subject of fascination, awe, and revulsion since their time to even today, centuries after the end of their reign. Their 3 centuries long hegemony over India has altered the culture, customs, and beliefs of this land in profound ways, both directly and indirectly. Therefore, understanding this period has crucial ramifications for Indian self identity. However, this is not an easy task. Despite the vast amount of research and scholarship that has gone into it, the Mughal period remains highly complex. The task of unearthing the truth has become even more challenging due to the various agenda driven narratives, starting from their own contemporaries to British colonists, the Indian nationalists during the freedom struggle, then post independence governments, and more recently the Hindutva right wing. Popular views have become increasingly polarized. At one extreme end, Mughals are glorified as secular, benevolent rulers presiding over a multicultural realm. And at the other end, they are caricatured as religious zealots and barbaric oppressors. We believe in open and candid debate is the need of the hour. I'm honored to have with me on the panel Professor Shireen Moosvi, who's the senior most professor of history at Aligarh Muslim University and the author of highly acclaimed books on the Mughal period. She has led the posts of chairman of the Department of History and the director of Center of Advanced Study in History at the Aligarh Muslim University. We have Abhas Maldayar, who is an author of fiction and non-fiction and well-known columnist. He's currently working on a 6-volume series on Mughals based on primary source research such as the Babarnama. We have Dr. Tripurdaman Singh, who is a renowned historian and author. He is currently a British Academy postdoctoral fellow at the Institute of Commonwealth Studies, University of London. Among other things, he focuses on Rajput-Mughal relations and the decline of the Mughal Empire. Welcome all of you to Argumentative Indians, a platform for honest debates.
Thank you very much for inviting us, Yajur. Pleasure to be here.
So when evaluating historical figures and events, it is important to do so in context of that period and not judge them on modern parameters. So my opening question is, how do the Mughals stack up against the contemporaries on religious tolerance? So their contemporaries being the other large empires of the day, be it the Portuguese, the Chinese, the Ottomans, the Safavids, the French. How do Mughals compare versus their own peers? Why don't we start with you, Mr. Dr. Singh?
I mean, I think there's it's if we take just a step back from that, the thing is these sort of imperial structures were they had by kind of the very nature of the early modern world, they had to have flexible structures and institutions to accommodate disparate groups. They couldn't afford to be, how should I put it, intolerant in the way we understand the term now. And when we frame the question in this way, there's a slight danger that we project frameworks that we use to make sense of our own world back to a period where both political ideas and institutional sort of structures were very different. So I don't think the Mughals were any, I would say, less tolerant than their peers. If anything, I'm not very, very familiar with Ottoman history or with Safavid history. It's not something that I've studied very closely. But by their very nature, early modern imperial forms had to be flexible and accommodative of many religions, interests, groupings, and so they had to evolve without, being secular and all of these terms, which only make sense in the modern world. They weren't secular, They didn't believe in things like equality, etc. But they did evolve these sort of flexible structures and institutions to accommodate the groups that they ruled over, because in some sense they had to. And when I mean the groups, I don't mean every in the sense of every group being accommodated. I mean that in the sense of kind of local elites, those who provided access to to the ground in a way. So these that would include zamindars, rajas, leaders of any sort. So these interests, they had to find some way of accommodating them, and they evolved these structures to do so.
Thank you. So let's make it a little bit simpler, right? We can focus on some of the other people who were in the Indian domain at the same time. So we obviously had the Portuguese during the early part, and they had an enclave in India, and we know some of their policies, be it the religious conversions, or then there was the Vijayanagar Empire of the period, which also had a mixed population of different religions. Mm-hmm. And next to us, we had the Safavids and Chinese to the north. So let's not go too far, but sort of look at like what else was going on in that period. I would like to get you, Abhas, in on the same question.
Yeah, so when the word tolerance and intolerance comes in, so we generally tend to relate it with the modern context, and we always draw the definition with per se that how we have been seeing as a term, like this tolerance and intolerance has again come into the debate, perhaps for some 8-9 years or so. It has been a heated matter of debate, and I see that even Mughals have been dragged into the matter certainly with the time frame. So in my observation, history has always been a casualty of the biases of the people, and it comes from different ends of extremities, as you also said initially. It is very important to understand that every human being is gray, and hence all the historical characters too are. You just can't expect any historical character per se to be just a black or white. They were just carrying something, what they had in the baggage of the past, and also what was happening around. So things about history need to be read in conjunction with the context and time. You can read about historical instances, but never learn history if context goes ignored. And learning and reading are two different things. You can just read out the instances. So context creates a perspective through the reason of the context and the witnesses around. So in case of Mughals too, we have more opinions and what we can say fewer facts on table, though they exist in the abundance. There are a lot of primary sources. Mughals have really documented all their things quite well. And it's all right now because of the internet age. All the documents are so easily available. One can really go through what was happening around and how the cases was being presented. But we have seen extreme fantastical vilification by people like James Rowe. I guess it is there. Like he has been very fantastical about when he's explaining about the Mughal campaigns and how they were fighting with the Rajputanas. So yes, of course, this must have been inspired from the real incidences. I'm not denying it because of course, when something has been written, there would have been some basis. While there are some people who are extremely eulogizing by too great of greatness of extremities. So there are two extremities which are existing, and somehow we are missing the gray patch of the Mughals. So I do call that we have got a PR agencies of the Mughals of the two ends, perhaps when the Mughals would have seen all these PR agencies, they might have fired all those guys because their texts are not aligning with the views which the agencies themselves are presenting. And so, for example, if we just start off with the case of, say, addressing the Mughals as Mughals, So, but Mughals actually had never addressed themselves as Mughals per se. They were never known as the Mughals. While penning Babarnama, Babur made a clear distinction between him being a Timurid prince. He always connected with the Taimur, then relating himself with the Mughals. And though he uses the word Mughals, but never relates himself with the Mughals. So he has a very clear distinction. Now, it all begins with the name itself, if I have to say. And I will take you to the context also, that how it's related to the country. And so, Yazur, I can get some 10 minutes or so to elaborate upon this.
You can continue, but let's not cover too many points because then others won't have the opportunity to counter you on those points.
I will not get into Mughals right now. I'll just set the pressing that why Mughals were the way they were. So related with the contemporary situation around and the, yeah. So it all begins with the name itself. They have been addressed as Mughals, though they never called themselves Mughals, as I already stated. So now the question arises that why I'm bringing the name in the debate of the tolerance. The answer lies in the fact that when the name distortion occurred only because something was to be hidden or maybe some other narrative was to be created, because till 19th century we don't find this thing Mughals being attributed to these guys. So we suddenly, they were known as Timurid Gurkhanis, to be precise. That's how they have addressed themselves. So Abul Fazl does calls in Aini Akbari as an empire of Hindustan. Again, he's not using the term Mughals. So now the coming back to the name, Taimur never liked himself to be known as Mughal, though Genghis Khan and he came from the same common ancestor, that is Tumane Khan. They had a common ancestry. But despite that, Taimur never, and Taimur was the 10th generation, while the Genghis Khan was the 5th generation per se. Babur's ancestors were sharply distinguished from the classical Mongols, and they were oriented more toward the Persian rather than the Turco-Mongol culture. In fact, if I quote historian Joseph Saunders, he said that Taimur was the product of Islamized and Iranized society and not the steppe nomadic. So he considered Taimur to be more of a sophisticated and a complex guy. So if one looks into the character of Mughal, the character of Taimur, people will find that he's a very opportunist guy. He is not one, who just goes with the wind like the Mongols. He's very opportunistic. He takes the advantage of being Turco-Mongolian heritage, having Turco-Mongolian heritage. He also uses Islamic religion and the Sharia law whenever required. So he goes into traditions of the Mughal Empire also to achieve all his military goals. And this exactly was a trait of the Mughals. If you start relating apple to apple, you will find a lot of relations. So yes, the barbaric traits of steppe nomads were there in the roots, but because he was always in touch with the Persians and he's more of a sophisticated guy per se. So he is a lot more different than the Mongols. And when it comes to toleration, Mongols were very tolerant people. If you look at the era of Genghis Khan, a lot of religions were, but when Taimur took over, when the Persia, he was around Persia and around, so there were a lot of devastations which happened in the name of religion too, though perhaps that might not be his intention. He might be a very irreligious person, but he was seeing religion as a fuel. And if you read really the works around that period, whether it's about the Christian work or it's Islamic, any work, you'll see that religion has always been used the fuel to incite the people and get the works done. So yes, and when I look back at all these traits of Taimur, I don't see a reason, or again, when I go back to the reason where he comes from, the Mongolia, the root where the Mongolia lies, I don't see a reason why, these guys need not be intolerant. That was a particular character where it was intolerance was more of a aid to do the business for them. That is how they established their business. So,
just to sum up, right? So you were saying Mughals had their Mughals basically draw their lineage from Genghis Khan, so which was the Mongol side, and Taimur, which was the sort of the Timurid side. They like to themselves associate themselves more with the Timur side, and that's what they call themselves, the Timurids. But it was at a later time that historians started calling them the Mughals, associating them with these tolerant Mongols as opposed to the intolerant Tamerlane. Yeah. So you're saying there might be an agenda there that takes them away, dissociates them from Taimur and associates them more with the Mongols.
Yeah, but that's the only reason which I could come across. But of course, there might be some.
Whose agenda would that be? Like, what would be the agenda, and who would that serve? Whose purpose would be served by that?
So around 18th century, around 18th century there was a writing, and in that writing it is said that the people were looking upon Genghis Khan as the role model of the liberalism in the modern Europe, and I'm forgetting the name of the writer, and he has quoted a person. He compared him to a person who happens to be probably Luke or someone who happens to be the inspiration for the Voltaire as well. So that was a level of comparison what these guys were getting. And when you go ahead to compare it with the Mongol, like people like Genghis, that's how you are drawing the lineage from, and that's how you're relating it to. It clarifies that the people are more of a tolerant, and so a narrative was being created around the 19th century, where where the countries were getting independent. A lot of narratives were being written, and unfortunately, we have been really unfortunate to have not been able to write down history from our own perspective. Of course, I say that it will be gray. It will not be black and white. I don't want to go to the extremities of James Todd also. But there has to be some balance. There has to be our narrative, which needs to come in. And somehow...
Genghis Khan does not have a very good reputation in the European versions. Like generally in the West, the Mongols are still associated with extreme violence. That's usually the image the Mongols evokes, that they came with this extreme violence, ruthlessness, and they had no qualms about murdering people. Genghis Khan, despite the fact that he wasn't religiously intolerant, that's something only a seasoned historians know. An average person thinks of Genghis Khan or Kublai Khan or the Mongols in general in a very negative light. Isn't that right?
Yeah, and so if I've just pulled across that quote, what was quoted was that the Catholic inquisitors of the Europe who defended nonsense by cruelty might have been confounded by the example of a barbarian who anticipated the lessons of philosophy and established by his laws a system of pure theism and perfect toleration. So here it's talking about toleration about the religion and accommodating a lot of people. And in fact, there was a time when Genghis Khan had really protected the Muslims, and the Muslims had given him the title, the defender of religion. So it's a very complex character. I say that all the characters are too complex. And the 19th century was a period when, being the invaders, I'm talking about, this quote is from 18th century. So that was a period when people were doing invasion, but everyone was talking about a society where they can bring in secularism, they can bring some kind of tolerance among them. So, but of course, they were marching to invade more and more places. And that's when the era of the isms and all also arise. So everything, when we superimpose all these ideas together, we will see that perhaps the invasion was not being considered too negative over there, but somehow to incorporate all, to get in all the sects together, to imbibe the idea of secularism was more of a focus back then.
Right. So let's come back from the older Mongols to the sort of Indian Mughal, what we call Mughals in this period. There's a lot of there's a widespread conception view that large scale proselytization or conversion took place during the Mughal period, which resulted in large percentage of Indian population converting, whether by choice or by force.
Yeah.
So I want to bring in Professor Moosvi on this one. Are you ready, Dr. Shireen? Yes. So there is an accusation that large-scale conversions took place, and both because of economic reasons, that were the conditions were made by the Mughals became hence such that people were incentivized to convert to Islam, or they were forced to convert to Islam at the sword. That's the general that's a general view, right? How true is that? I'm not sure. Professor Moosvi? Okay, I'll come back to Dr. Singh for now. I'm not sure if Dr. Moosvi is feeling all right. Oh, ma'am, you're on mute.
I think she's on mute. So if yeah.
Yes, I just realized. Can you unmute yourself? Ask to unmute. Professor Moosvi? Just press unmute, ma'am.
Okay.
Yes, we can hear you now. Perfect.
Right. So I would like to say that I find it very difficult to agree what has been said, because I don't think there were any force as far as the historical sources are concerned. I don't find any evidence of forced conversions at all. if you will just let me say that, I will say that one can't even imagine that India of that time was such sort of a thing. Badayuni, a great critic of Akbar, laments about India in the beginning, that it's such a country where nobody bothers which religion the other person is following. He is lamenting about it, he is not celebrating it. He is very worried about it. So it was a country where this sort of feelings were not present there. So no question of conversion, and we don't get any record in any contemporary source about conversion.
Okay,
All
and
the
ma'am,
Rajputs and all other nobles remain true to their religion. Todermal will be writing, and even while Akbar imposed jizya on non-Muslims for a while, for a very short period, for which Badayuni says that it was writing on the riverbed, or not river water. Even at that time, Todermal writes in that his say seal bears Todermal, the Ram ki Panah, slave of Akbar, Ram ki Panah. So even on an official order of the Diwan will carry Ram ki Panah in his seal, and there will be nobody bothering about it. All the Rajputs came and they continued with their religion on their advice, on their request. The Brindaban, in the Brindaban, so much grants were given by Akbar to the Gosains, and you still have the temple built by them, which Akbar himself visited. Let's have other points. If you wish any other point with me too.
ma'am, can you also sort of cover, like a lot of people have this view that yes, while Akbar did try to placate most of the population, the trajectory was changed post Shah Jahan, and especially Aurangzeb was a very pious emperor, and he obviously brought back jizya and started destroying temples and doing large-scale conversions. Is that true?
I won't say even Aurangzeb forced anyone to convert. He did destroy his temple, the worst thing one could do. And I won't say that Shah Jahan, only I said from Akbar to Jahangir. The religion has nothing to do with the state. It was Shah Jahan who didn't impose religion on the state, but he started appearing as a great Muslim. We never find Akbar offering prayer, while we find Shah Jahan. You open the Badshah Nama, you will be finding Shah Jahan is going for the Eid, Namaz-e-Bakrid, and he is going to mosque, and he is building the mosque and all that. So religiosity started off with Shah Jahan's period, and it was on Aurangzeb's period when intolerance was introduced, and he tried to do all that, whatever he could do in that respect. So I have no apologies as far as Aurangzeb's reign is concerned. I have no liking for Shah Jahan's reign, even in spite of all his contribution in the form of Taj Mahal and Agra, Lal Qila and others. But it was not a golden period of our history. It was only Akbar and Jahangir's period. I will say that this was the period I am ready to define.
Okay, thank you. So I'll come to Tripurdaman. So Tripurdaman, I want to ask you the same question, right? Do you, as a historian, do you find evidence for large-scale conversions taking place in India during the Mughal period, especially forced conversions?
I've never come across any sort of, I'd say, reliable records or any reliable scholarship built on those records that would support the idea of large-scale forced conversions. That's not to say that that didn't happen on occasion. There was, as Professor Moosvi mentioned, for example, that she wouldn't want to defend the reigns of Shah Jahan and Aurangzeb, and these kinds of things happened sporadically in the reigns of those two emperors. But even there, I have never really come across any contemporary evidence or any reliable scholarship, because there are so many scholars who work on this period. Anybody who's come up with very reliable scholarship to back up this assertion that there was large-scale forced conversions. The other thing is a quick sort of thing about Mughal sources. I mean, when we do read Mughal sources, and that's not just Professor Moosvi, of course, mentioned Badayuni, and he was a critic of Akbar. He's often sort of pitted against Abul Fazl, who was, who almost saw Akbar as a sort of divine, semi-divine figure. And the thing with reading Mughal sources is that you have to keep in mind where they're coming from, because oftentimes their writers have their own axe to grind in the way that they're writing. So somebody wants to criticize the emperor, somebody wants to really glorify the emperor. And so they say and write things in, you have to read them with keeping in mind in the context that they were written. So it's not a sort of neutral piece of information which you can pick up and say, okay, this is what is written, and this is what it is. So you have to keep in mind the context of how it was written, and how things were also functioning around it. So you have to kind of take them collectively, and it's very difficult to pick up individual sources and just say, well, this is what it was, because if you only read Badayuni, you will get a very different sense of what Akbar's reign is, for example, than if you read an account of it by Abul Fazl. And this is just a kind of very basic example.
But just to counter that, right, you said there's not much evidence of religious persecution or intolerance or conversions. But one of the most quoted examples.
Now you're putting all of this together. So conversions, tolerance, we have to be able to separate these a bit. So if there was no large-scale evidence of conversion, doesn't mean that there may not have been intolerance, and so.
But they're related, right? If you make situations uncomfortable for a religious group, then you are indirectly forcing them to choose conversion. So, right, if you make things economically difficult, or you start taking away their places of worship, so the sort of the communal strength places where they have their social interactions and all, you sort of make it difficult for them to go up in life, and you sort of incentivize them to choose a religion where things get easier for them, right?
Yeah, part and parcel, I think, of those. Yeah, I mean, you're right there. But the thing, but that never seems to have occurred on a scale that would cause large-scale conversions, right? So the fact that conversions on that humongous scale don't seem to have happened, or at least there's little sort of textual evidence of it happening, I'd assume would or could, I can't make one of the things my old supervisor, C.A. Bailey, used to say is that when we're talking about the early modern and medieval period, effectively we're all kind of flying by the seat of our pants, because to make very categoric claims is difficult. But the fact that didn't happen, I'd assume would suggest that the pressure was never overbearing to that extent.
Okay, Abbas, I'd like to get your view on this one as well.
Yeah, I always stand with the fact that, the biggest blunder what has happened with the history is that we have categorized the Turko-Mongols into the Islamic invaders as well. So what it did, it also created a case in a social structure where we live in, that, the moment you create a narrative, it will start being waved into related to the religion. So because of that, also not many sources have not been, people don't even put it across that what is happening and what is on the table. And I completely agree with Tripu Damanji for one point that, yes, there was not a very systematic conversion like how we saw in the case of Orangzet. Like Orangzet conversion campaign was not very wise and was actually very horrendous. And
but that's also debatable. That's also debatable. Not
yeah,
many
I'll come to that.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll come to that as well. So I was quite amused to read few pieces where I came across about, to start off with, that Aurangzeb built more temples than, really demolished it. But what happens that when you are getting into the criminal act, like if a person murders someone, it doesn't matter that how good he has been for thousands of other people. Murder is a murder. Like for that example, for that matter, I'm not first, even if I don't pick a debate whether Aurangzeb really demolished that many temples or not, even if he has demolished one, it's not a right matter for the people whoever were residing here. Now, coming back to the conversion tactics by Aurangzeb, he literally used to incentivize the people for the conversion, and these all are records. They are really up there. And for today, I have not been able to put my PPT across. Otherwise, I would have presented those snaps as well. So where he's really talking about if a male converts, then what amount will be given if female converts. And again, this was a very tactics. What had happened when Aurangzeb was also seeing a lot of resistance from the Maratha Empire. It was really happening. And it's really ironical that, Akbar had 0.75 million square million of land of India. Maratha Empire in its extent had 0.9 square million of land. Despite that, the historians call that empire as a Hindustani empire as well, but Maratha Empire was never, but that's a different thing. I don't want to get into this right now. But yes, because he was facing a lot of resistance, so he was also changing a lot of policies. And in fact, it's very interesting that the way he registered Dara Shikoh, like when he had gifted a certain set of railings to the temple, he was so devastated, and he puts on record in Farman that, how can it's so against the religion of the Musliman, how can he do that? And when this happened, he just immediately ordered to get the things removed. And there are further more records from his own Farman, where he is talking about destruction of temple. Now, I completely agree to you on this point that, any kind of destruction or any kind of violence is somehow coming with a certain motive. Or else, why will you go out there to destroy a mandir or a temple while you will keep on building a masjid? So if that is the case, then the masjid needs to be destroyed. But this was not the case. The case was something, of course, the want was something like that. And Aurangzeb definitely was a very pious Muslim. And of course, he also a few people also recognize him being related to Darwish or the Sufis also to some extent. And so Aurangzeb's records are all there straight. Coming to the emperor or the king Akbar. Akbar is one of the most great character. Like he starts off with a very different note and goes on a very different kind of transformation at the end of his life. He's completely, what you can say, quite a bit of transformed man from the whatever happened. And to understand the character of Akbar, what is the most interesting thing is to be noted that in Aine Akbari, Abul Fazl has quoted that when he was when he was on the coronation ceremony was happening, this title was taken by him. There's a myth also that so it speaks of a character that he always wanted to become a great. So for him, religion was not a matter, but he wanted to look at all the means by which he can really become the greatest of all the lot. And that's why he even went on to try to on his when he used to enter the court, it used to be said that the emperor of the Islam, or I forgot the exact word, is coming in, and he always used to be like to be called as a Ghazi. And these all are very religious anecdotes which are being added to Akbar.
But so religion and culture have always been quite mixed, right?
Yeah.
Now, when I listen to all of you, it sounds to me, actually, just let me put, I'm just going to put Shireen ji, I'm going to put you on mute for 1 second because my voice is echoing. So the picture that's emerging from what all of you are telling me is a very complex picture it sounds like these characters, Akbar, Aurangzeb, Jahangir, they're power hungry, they are egomaniacs, they are vain, but none of this, which is quite common for kings and emperors all over the medieval world. But I'm not getting a picture of religious intolerance. And religious intolerance, when I see it, when I'll tell you why, when I would be able to see religious tolerance. For example, if the same period, I want to look at Goa, the history of Goa and all, there was an inquisition going on during this period where large scale people were forced to convert and temples were destroyed, religious ceremonies. If they wanted, the Mughals had far more resources in India to convert everyone if they wanted to. But we don't see that. In fact, interestingly, the heart of Mughal Empire seems to have been the least Islamicized. If you look at where India, most of the religious conversion seems to have happened in East Bengal, West Pakistan, and Kashmir, so the fringes of Mughal Empire. But the heart, where the Delhi, Agra, and UP is, there we don't see that level of Islamicization. So is it fair that in contemporary view, so many people are linking Mughals with the Islamicization of Indian subcontinent? Or is that a misleading claim?
Sorry,
go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, no. One of the problems with looking at Mughal history is in contemporary times. There's two actually. One is the attempt to trace some sort of historical genealogy for Indian secularism by locating it in the Mughal period. So it's then seen as this sort of it has a historical trajectory as something that began with Akbar, and it's a legacy that we have and the kind of modern Indian state has carried on. And the other is the project, and the other it's very closely related to this, is the projection of contemporary sort of political and religious conflict, especially I guess when looking at sort of Hindu-Muslim conflict engendered around and post-partition, is again to take it back to the Mughal period. And both these things are closely connected. So trying to trace the genealogy of Indian secularism to the Mughals unnecessarily politicizes a period in history which has, in some senses, very little to do with contemporary political conflict. And the Mughal Empire waned, we forget. By 1737, you had Baji Rao thundering at the gates of Delhi, and for any practical purpose, the Mughal Emperor's political authority was finished. But then you also have to have the question: if the Indian Mughal legacy was so toxic, then the only thing that the Marathas had to do was to dethrone the emperor. But no one dethrones the emperor until 1857. So I think this attempt to historicize Indian secularism, and related to it, the attempt, therefore, to also see the origins of this sort of political and religious conflict in that period, unnecessarily makes us think of that period in these very charged terms, which is kind of counterproductive, I would say, to making sense of it on its own terms, as Abhas suggested. And again, as he said, I'd agree that there was great difference between the reigns of say Akbar and Jahangir, or Shah Jahan and Aurangzeb. In fact, great differences between the early part of Shah Jahan's reign and the latter part of Shah Jahan's reign as well. So I think
But Dr. Singh, is it true that this politicization is not new? Even during the independence movement, people had started looking back to the Akbar's period as a sort of pre-British divide and rule, that there was a concept that there was a syncretic Indian society. Yeah. And Professor Moosvi just said that, but then you lamented that people did not bother what another person's religion was. So there was this feeling that before the British divide and rule, there was a society which was a syncretic culture, And we have grown up to this conventional wisdom of a syncretic secular society, which is why that has been the model for modern India. But now there are a lot of historians who are driving attention to the fact that when we do this, we are overlooking the resistance and struggle of so many native Indian historical figures who were resisting during the time of Babur, during the time of Humayun, Akbar, Shah Jahan. The struggle never stopped. That resistance never stopped, whether it was the Sikh gurus, Tegh Bahadur Naur, or whether the Rajputs, where you are an expert, or the Marathas, or the other tribal leaders. So by turning that period into this glorified utopias, a multicultural utopia, aren't we discrediting all of the historical figures who gave up their life trying to resist what they saw as an oppressive foreign rule?
Again, I mean, the thing is, yes. So during the independence movement, people did start looking back at Akbar's period, but we also have to remember the questions that people at that point in time were trying to answer. They were trying to answer. They were trying to come up with an intellectual answer as to a counter to the British argument that India could never be one because society was divided by religion, by caste, etc. So you needed British rule. That India could not be a united country. So they were also addressing these questions. It was not a simple sort of. They weren't, and I guess nobody ever is, in some senses, looking at it purely in a vacuum. We have to keep in mind what they sought to achieve by looking at that period. And looking at that period was for them a way of A, saying that colonialism was not inevitable, B, that India was not necessarily divided by caste, religion, etc. always. So they were trying to come up with an answer to a colonial critique. And now, okay, we can say that it was syncretic. Sorry, one sec.
Yep.
Yeah, no. So the thing is, okay, we can say syncretic, but the point is, a syncretic society is not a secular society. To be secular means something very different from being either tolerant or syncretic or pluralistic. So that's, I think, where again we create conflict, which needn't exist. I mean, religion was very much a part of the Mughal state.
Political discourse.
And to say that it was secular would be to kind of, effectively we're projecting a term that doesn't make sense in that period in this context, and B, that's like flat out lying.
But even if let's say we put aside religion, but there is another accusation that often comes up these days, is that they were foreign rulers. They never considered themselves Indian. So it is a work of later historians that they have been indigenized, but they always saw themselves as foreigners ruling over India. How accurate is that? I'd like to get Professor Moosvi back on this one. Ma'am, you'll have to unmute before you speak. Can you unmute? Okay.
The first thing I would like to say is that I thought we are going to discuss Akbar's period, but now if we are coming directly to discuss on the say rulers, or I will say I'm not depending myself. First, Ain Akbari has nothing to do with political history. It's only an administrative manual full of statistics on which I have worked all my life. And as far as Akbarnama, the other work of Abul Fazl is concerned, that's the part of history where he describes it. So the one thing which we must remember of that period is that while Babur attacked or tried to conquer India, whom he looked forward to fight against Sikandar Lodi? Have we forgotten that this was no one but he sought the support of the non-Muslim rulers of India at that time to fight back the Muslim rulers who were already there, because they were not the first rulers over there. So we must remember first this atmosphere. Then we should also remember that it was Akbar who was born at the house of Rana Amarkot, Rana Prasad of Amarkot, when where Humayun has left his pregnant wife and fled away. So that was a totally different time, which we do not conceive now, because in my time, we were not having Akbar, we were having Ashok, Akbar and Nehru, whose name we do not want to mention now, as our three historical heroes, the period of whom was supposed to be the golden age. Ashoka for his religious tolerance, and so was Akbar, and so was Nehru. Secularism is a very different word, which means that state has no religion. So secularism should not be taken as a period of tolerance only. It is a totally different sort of a concept which came with Nehru. It was not the part of Akbar. Akbar tolerated all religion. Ashok tolerated all religions. These were the period of tolerance, and Nehru's period was where state has no religion. Everybody was free to follow whatever religion one has to. This is the first thing I would like to ask. Then what was Akbar's India like? Or it remained up to even part of Shah Jahan's period, because Shah Jahan himself was not at all communal. He was not differentiating. It was only that he has started becoming religious. He started offering prayers and all that, which you will not find Akbar or Jahangir doing at all. At least not public. That was nothing which is mentioned even in Tuzuk. You will be finding he says how much he is drinking. He never says I'm going to offer prayers. So that is a totally different issue. So the major issue is that Akbar's period was a period of total tolerance even before Akbar was born. India has already a tolerant country, which we perhaps we never bothered whose religion is what. And we were people who were going our own way. Everybody was free to do something. It is a modern phenomena which is now becoming more and more accentuated. So Akbar's period was a period of tolerance, where if Akbar has never to decide if jizya is to be imposed, Todarmal will be issuing the order. It will be under the order of the Todarmal, that the Bandai Dargah Todarmal, that the Mehzar was issued, that the issue of the Mehzar, which has decided that nobody will be following a particular religion and all that, and Akbar will be supreme and all. And even afterwards, it was a period while all the temples of, and this is not coming from Akbarnama, and I am talking of the documents in coming from Vrindavan in the Braj Bhasha, which have been interpreted by Dr. Mukherjee. And he and Professor Habib has published a whole book on Vrindavan in Mughal era. And you have the documents and their translation over there, that how the Vrindavan was given grants by Akbar on the advice of those who were the followers of Hinduism, and particularly Shankaracharyas, to whom the grants were given to build temple. And Akbar and Jahangir are the only two who visited those temples. Jahangir was ready to visit any temple, but Akbar went only to these two temples. So this was a totally different era we are talking.
Ma'am, can I ask you a counter question?
Yes.
Would it be fair to would it be fair to see it in this way, that Akbar was the empire builder? When he started off, it was fairly small, and he was the one who built up and expanded this empire. So what he needed was not to fight with all the people, but to get them on his side. He wanted to do alliances with the Rajputs and others. So a pragmatic, I'm just thinking political terms and economic terms, political policy would be not to start problems, but to get everybody along so that you can get achieve your political aims. By the time you get to Shah Jahan and then later to Orangzet, they already are born into this massive empire, which at the time probably they thought was invincible and all powerful. So there was no more need to do alliances with people of ideological differences. So at that stage, your political calculation changes, and then you can start thinking about enforcing your own ideologies on other people. Would that be a fair way to understand
No,
this
I
evolution?
think I'll beg to disagree with you on this point. The first thing is that Akbar's policy was a product of his own conduct and his own time and his own legacy. As I have said that Babur sought support from against the Lodis from the Hindu rulers of that time. So it was not, and so was Humayun, who has left his wife to Rana Amarkot, where Akbar took birth. So those times were very different, and these have been wrongly depicted for us in history. First thing, this if you go through the documents, original documents, you will find it different. As far as Akbar is concerned, he has a bent of mind where he wanted to meet with people and to be one with people. Right? He will go under different guises and meeting people, living with them. Nobody will be able to recognize him. There are so many of these accounts in various documents, as well as an historical account that he went to the Mela, where he was somehow, some people came to recognize him, and he feigned to be a squint so that nobody could recognize him. So he had that sort of a feeling to meet people, to be with them. If the nobles will bring the, say, expensive gifts to him, he will throw them away. If the people from, say, Sasni will go with bear, he will accept them, put them to his chest, and then start eating along with them. So it was a different character, a different man. Everybody has a personality, and Akbar has that sort of a personality. To meet people, to be with them, to learn from them, to be one of them. So he was a different sort of thing. It was not a policy that he wanted people to come and join him. Of course, if Orangzeb has already a lot of power, so had Akbar. You know, if he has only taken over, say, the Rajput, he allied with the Rajput. Along with this alliance, he could have gone against all others. He didn't do that. Right? So it was not that. He has a totally different temperament, and those time were different. Badanyuni is so much against this time. Look at the people, why they do not distinguish with religion. Why do they want to live with each other? He is lamenting all along in his writings. So we must understand that we, right from the beginning, Aryans were never a race which was not ready to live with others. Otherwise, perhaps we wouldn't have come to this place, which we conquered right from the Punjab down to the, at least up till the fringes of the south.
Got you. Thank you, ma'am. Abbas, I'll come back to you now, and I want to take the focus away from religion for a moment and focus more on culture and heritage. A lot of times people claim that Mughals, whether religiously tolerant or not, like under them, India was under foreign oppression. They were foreign rulers, and they never really saw themselves as Indians. There's no reason for us to see them as Indians. And even up till the later generations, but even up till the time of Aurangzeb, the official training of most Mughal princes was mostly comprised of learning Turkish and Persian literature, Arabic calligraphy, and so forth. It did not focus on Indian heritage or literature, which makes us think that they clearly distinguished that where their lineage was, where their ancestry was, and Hindustan was a land that they were ruling and administering over. What is your view on this? Is that an accurate assumption that they saw themselves as foreign rulers ruling over a land which did not belong to them?
See, I'll just give you a very simple case. Say it's the Indian state, and suddenly 70% of the courtiers or the ministers don't come from India, and the official language is Chinese or the Mandarin. So I'm just giving a case. So a layman, what he will relate it to, who doesn't know that who Akbar is, or whoever who doesn't know that who the prime minister is, or who the home minister is. Of course, the first reaction would be that it's a very foreign administered system. The records of Shah Jahan itself clarifies that around 70% of the 60 to 70% of the people, courtiers, were not from not from India. And also, we also come to know that the official language definitely was not Indian, any Indian languages. And of course, when you are looking to integrate the Indian courtiers, you want to connect with the people, then of course you will have more of Indian languages being used. But it was not the case. It was always other ways around. Of course, for that reason also, it's a very strong case that when Babur was looking, when Akbar was looking to get the thing collated, the Babarnama, again the language used was not of any of the Indian languages. It was for the people who knew the language. What was the foreign language? Had it been for the Indians, of course, it's not so that there was no Indian languages. Akbar was not working on other languages too. There were a lot of other works also which were happening in other languages. But despite that, the major works, like if you have to tell the tale of the Babur, it was not done in the Indian language to start off with. The core language was definitely not any Indian thing. When it comes to what is very surprising that, we do talk about a lot of advancement in terms of culture, tradition, and a lot of things are out there. But why suddenly we stopped really creating a lot of universities? We really didn't have a lot of the trend of building the universities really stopped by then. And I would just relate it back to the point which we were discussing, that why Akbar was this way, and the point which you raised that perhaps with the time that things changed. We need to understand that Babur clearly sees himself that he's just going from here there, and he's really struggling to make a foothold. He's not a very powerful ruler at that time. And Farishta does calls him like a king on a chessboard, because that's what when I say king on a chessboard, who plays chess will understand what it means. But he's not a very reinforced guy. And he himself says that in India, he sees that there's a lot of gold, there's a lot of wealth. And also he sees that there's a lot of labor also which is available. And this again, all are stated in Babarnama. He's seeing a very good docile labors, what he calls over there. And also then he got really a lot of affection with the India, as the case I made that he had come here to stay in India, and he would have liked himself to be buried here, but his choice was not to be buried here. So there are a lot of things which are said about India, which is not, someone.
But in Babur's case is different, right? Because Babur is the first generation who comes to India. It's his adopted home.
Yeah,
but the other subsequent generations were born in India. And I want you, my question to you is straightforward, right? Based on your reading of primary sources, did the subsequent Mughal kings consider themselves Indian?
So I don't think so that they were considering much of them to be Indian per se. Yes, of course, in Abul Fazl records, the empire itself is called Hindustan to start off with, right? And of course, Hindustan name also comes from various reasons. And right from beginning, the state or the place is being addressed as Hindustan. And this is for the first time when Abul Fazl has just picked and stated that it's a Hindustani empire or something like that, not exactly the Mughal, because Mughal also came very later on.
It's a later term, but did they call themselves Hindustani?
No, I don't see it, because the whole point is that there should have been Indian language in use or as a court language to start off with. You can't run a court of the people whom you are, trying to rule over, or administrator use a foreign language for them. It just cannot be the case.
Let's get Dr. Singh on this one. Dr. Singh, why did they never adopt an Indian language? Even after so many generations, many of the Mughal princes had Indian mothers. So they probably, obviously, all of them must have spoken in Hindi or whatever languages were prevalent in Rajputana at the time. How come they never, even after so many generations, any Indian language did not replace Persian? What was the reason for that?
I mean, one of the reasons, of course, is that the Mughals looked up culturally to the Persians. So after Humayun came back, the Persian, there was how the empire might have developed if Humayun hadn't had to kind of flee to Persia. We may never know. But since then, there was always considerable Persian influence, and the Mughals very much looked up to the Persians as the sort of cultural reference point. And so the vice versa didn't happen, right? Because the Persians always thought, well, these guys use our language, they can't pronounce it properly, and so on and so forth. So Persian was, the Mughals very much considered them to be their reference point as and as their cultural superiors. So that's how Persian came to be. But the arrival of Persian also radically changed Indian languages. I mean, the Hindi we speak, even those who kind of really
Well, so hold on to that point, the language, right? So besides the language, the princes who were groomed to administer over India or different parts of India, they were still trained on the Persian classics, the Turkish classics, the literature, and everything was a foreign literature that they were groomed on to administer India. To me, there is a parallel here when you look at a later colonization period under the British civil servants had to take exams on Roman history and Greek philosophy when where the job they would ultimately win would be to administer India, because there was an inherent racial superiority and disdain for Indian culture and heritage. Is it fair to say that they were it was similar in the Mughal case? There was a disdain towards Indian literature and heritage?
I mean, there probably was. I can't give a definitive answer to that, but I mean, I'd assume that to a certain extent there was. It was not universal, because you had you had the Mahabharata and the Upanishads, etc., being translated into Persian, but Persian was very much seen as the language of sophistication, of culture. But equally, it was also we forget that the Mughal Empire was also very much embedded in the larger sort of Persianate world. So there was a lot of back and forth from there. There was a lot of communication there. At one point, Shah Jahan decided to recapture what he considered his ancestral homeland. So he sent armies off to Samarkand and Central Asia. So there is Persian was seen as a repository of culture, as a sort of language of communication with the greater Persianate world in which the Mughals were embedded. And it was also kind of seen as the language of sophistication, because they looked up culturally to Persians. And so that the language Persian then also infiltrated. So yeah, that's true. They saw it as superior.
Then let me get Dr. Moosvi on this one, right? So Dr. Moosvi, the Persian, sorry, you'll have to unmute, but let me rephrase the question a little bit. So Persian at the time, Dr. Singh said Persian was the language of sophistication. It was the repository. Persia was looked at as the repository of culture.
By the Mughals, that's not normative. That's not my claim that it was. It is that they thought it to be.
Yeah. It was the view in this region at the time. What I was going to ask was, is it fair to look at that as a parallel to medieval Europe, where France was looked as the repository of culture in that period, and even other stronger empires like Russia, Germany, and all, they adopted the French language for their official customs and official state affairs, not because they thought less of themselves, but because French was the language of culture and sophistication. Is it fair to draw a parallel between France of medieval Europe and Persia of medieval Asia? I don't know. Dr. Moosvi, are you? I think she is probably not feeling well. I'm going to. Oh no, you need to unmute. Sorry. Sorry.
Right. So, sorry, for quite a few things here have been said, I do not agree at all. The first thing is that we must realize that first, Persian was not the mother tongue of Babar or Humayun. It might have become partly of Akbar, but though he himself has come out with poetry in Hindustani, and he called it Hindi, which was a mixture of what we now call Hindi and all that. He will be half of that, 3 or 4 couplets I know. I now can't immediately recall them, but that was that how he has uh, captured his tiger. But it was the main thing is that in India there was not a language. Hindi at that time was not there. A language emerged with the coming of the Mughals. While they started speaking people started speaking with each other in different languages. Gradually, this sort of a change came, which finally emerged in the form of Urdu, a language we do not now recognize, or we don't want to say that we own, which is purely an Indian language, a mixture of many languages having terms from all others. Written in a Persian script is perfectly all right, but it has a character which is totally different. As far as to say that they came, lived here, and so they didn't consider themselves Indian, we may remember that there was a man called Zafar, the last Mughal ruler, whose only lamentation was, "Do gaz zamina mili kuए यार में." जो इसके लिए रोता रहा that he couldn't wept for not being able to be buried in India, and was buried in Rangoon by the British, was made to be buried in Rangoon. So to say that remain foreigners, they never have a home to go back. They came to India, and from Humayun's time onwards, they became purely Indian. They have no place to go back to, so they couldn't claim to have another mother. So that also is a misconception, which is historically incorrect. This is the first thing I would like to add here. As far as we Indian, we always lived together before the coming of the British. As far as rulers are concerned, all are exploitative. A ruler is to live on the produce by others, on the toils of others. So we can't say about any ruler that they were rather, some might be more brute, some will be less. Akbar's period was much less. Jahangir's was also tolerant. From Shah Jahan's period, if he is building Taj Mahal and Lal Qila and all that, and in Lahore fort, so he needed more revenues and he became more rapacious. That is a totally different situation, which all the rulers do. The present ruler are doing perhaps to the extreme. So they are not bothering for how we are living and what's happening to us. While the world has got so civilized, if this is the situation, we can really well understand what was in 16th, 17th century. So this is my other point. So we have to look at the period, the nature of Indian society, and the nature of the Mughals who came to rule. They have no place to go back, so it was their country. They lived here as that. Zebul Nisa's entire poetry in Urdu, purely in Urdu, a language which came by intermixing language. So all that we now being taught is what misconceptions which are deliberate. I don't know why this attempt is being made. Those who are making it, they will know better about it. I can't claim to have that. I can't hear you.
Thank you, ma'am. So we are running short of time, but I want to capture one last question. Professor Moosvi talked about misconceptions. One of the very prevalent misconceptions these days is that Mughals are sort of bucketed together with the British as colonizers of India. I want to address this point, right? This seems puzzling on the face of it, since under the Mughal period, broadly from the period of Babur to Orangzet, India saw unprecedented prosperity. We ended up becoming the largest economy in the world, and according to most domestic and international sources, we were a very prosperous and rich and wealthy place. None of the foreign travelers report of misery or extreme poverty in India at the time. But when you look at the British period, obviously from being the wealthiest nation, we over the subsequent 200 years, we end up going on to become the poorest country in the world, or at least one of the poorest countries in the world. And that's a very well-documented history, the amount of oppression, economic exploitation, and political oppression that Indians had to undergo under the British. So it seems puzzling to me to see the Mughals as lumped together with the British as colonizers. I don't know, Abhas, if you can address that, what leads to this misconception, which becomes more and more common, has just become very common recently?
See, being colonizer, non-colonizer is a very, binaries which we have been choosing, all of us. That also happens with tolerance and intolerance. Like how actually I started off with that I wanted to set the precedent of Timur, because what Timur was, this is exactly or how most of the Mughals behaved, and it kept on changing with the time because of the evolution. So having said that, we have seen because we are talking about the economy, and if I just pick, if I don't go into the detail of it, just the statistics of Angus Madison, because that's the easiest thing anyone can read. Even anyone who's listening will be able to relate to it. When Mughals came in, our GDP per capita, GDP share was around 25%, around 1500 AD. If in around 10th century, it has been shown as 33% share. So there was certainly a dip. Our GDP share got drastically below China for the first time in 1620 AD. For the first time. Then we see that we had a massive growth around 1700 AD. As per the Angus Madison, again, the GDP share jumps up. Now, at the same time, GDP share is something which is the hold of, or GDP is something which is the hold of the empire, whatever is there. Now, when you look at Angus Madison's number for GDP per capita growth, I'm talking about growth. So GDP per capita growth from 1500 to 1820 AD, it's for the first time it goes into negative. There have been cases, and I can quote Irfan Harvey for this.
You said 1820.
Yeah, till 1820.
But 1820 is in the peak of the British grip over India, right?
So from 1520 to 1800, or 1520 to 18, anywhere there is 20, that number. So basically 1500 to 1800. There it says minus 0.1 is the GDP per capita. Anyone can verify from according to him. And he has his own methods of calculating, which, ma'am, I can show it. I have the snippet right with me. So anyways.
Yeah, carry on. We'll get Professor Moosvi's point right after that.
So, and Franco Bennett, who actually has visited the court of Akbar, and later many Portuguese had actually visited the courts. They have been talking about the miserable condition of the people. And this is coming from the diary. It might not be the case, but their diaries do speak for it. Right now, my primary source to understand from the perspective of the foreigner is definitely their diaries and not anyone else. So according to them, the condition, they have really said that the situation is becoming miserable. We have been seeing a lot of funds which are going to Makkah to please the sheriffs over there, because they were trying to control being the emperor of Islam and becoming the caliph as well. This is a very much, and this all are again on the records. It's nowhere it's coming out of record. So yes, there was, of course, GDP was increasing. It was not, because of course GDP was much higher before that. But yes, GDP kept on increasing. The country was quite rich enough, and uske baad built up again. British completely ruined it. They just did the maximum of the damage what they could do, whether it was educational capital or whatever you may like to call it. They just destroyed completely. But the process had begun over there, and I see that there are a lot of cases of disconnect. Right now, we are really going through a lack of time, so I cannot go on to elaborate it.
Something very basic was stated in the debate. The Mughals did not have any other home other than India,
and that's how.
And the British clearly had their home, where their goal was to enrich it. There was a massive transfer of wealth from India to Britain, which took place as India became really poor and Britain became really rich. But there is no such thing in the Mughal period where there's a transfer of wealth out of India. You could argue that some groups in India, I will come to the Mecca point. You can argue that some groups in India were more privileged and they got more advantage of the economic growth than the others. But the trickle-down effect would have helped keep the money eventually circulate in India itself. Isn't that right?
Because there's a Cambridge, I'll just quote you the book name as well. Just a moment. Just give me a moment.
Let's get the Cambridge guy to speak while you look it up.
Yes.
Why don't you give us your view from Cambridge?
No. So one thing that is right is that while there was a lot of wealth, it was also very concentrated. I mean, India had started to lag behind Europe with the sort of with the coming of the Enlightenment, etc. India had already started to lag behind Europe, even in something as basic as military technology, gunnery, which is something that the Mughals really prized. They started to lag behind the Ottomans and the Safavids, which is ultimately what led to them during the later time. For example, I mean, they couldn't stand up. There was the failure of Mughal campaigns in Kandahar, both by Orangzet and by Dara Shikoh, for example, because their gunnery was not as good as the Persians. So, and that was one thing. And the second, of course, was that per capita, also per capita GDP growth, and I mean the work of Tirthankar Roy, I guess, is important in looking at this. Is also that India had progressively started to lag behind Europe, and I wouldn't say that it was solely due to the Mughals. There was also a lot of disruption. I guess the Mughal Empire, as Mughal decline began, and there was a lot of disruption to trade, etc. There's that's well regarded, sort of well recorded. So yeah, there was this decline, but I don't think it was solely due to the Mughals. But also, I wouldn't characterize the Mughal period simply as this. It was a period of opulence for a particular class. It was also dependent on sort of constant imperial expansion. And once that expansion stopped, so they couldn't expand further west because of the Persians. They couldn't expand further east after defeats against the Ahoms. So the only expansion was towards the Deccan. And once sort of the Deccan expansion got bogged down and it started to cost money rather than bring in money, the Mughal economy kind of started to, I guess, run into trouble. And I think we could ask Professor Moosvi, who's, I guess, one of the doyens of Mughal economic history, to kind of, say a few words on that.
So we are going to conclude with Dr. Moosvi because we are running out of time. Abbas, before that, do you want to quickly make the points that you wanted to make?
Yeah, I was trying to quote the book of Muslim Civilization India by S.M. Ikram, where he has especially spoken about that how the money hoarding was really done by the emperors, and they did it. And in fact, the Cambridge Economic History, in which the editing has been done by Irfan Habib and Roy Chaudhary, in that also they have spoken about Akbar being one of the biggest hoarders. It has really been put into their works, and they have substantiated with a lot of details.
But even in the worst case, that would mean incompetent economic running. It would not mean extraction of wealth from India, which is the typical definition of textbook definition of colonialism. Colonialism is about economic extraction of wealth, right, out of a region of resources and wealth. Even if he was hoarding, his resources were still in India. Sooner or later, that circulates back into the Indian economy. Is that not right?
Yeah, it circulates. Sorry, if I could
please.
Just butt in, was that a lot of it circulated in the military labor market. So, it went into military campaigns, etc. So you had considerable amounts of wealth flowing, for example, into the Rajput kingdoms in Rajasthan, which were otherwise comparatively more arid and economically had been less prosperous. You had a lot of money flowing into the coffers of these sort of military commanders who became Mughal Mansabdars and gradually accumulated wealth. So a lot of money did flow into the military labor market, and we shouldn't underestimate just how important this military labor market was, and to the Mughal state, and its destabilization was to Mughal decline.
But the money still stayed in India, right? It did not go to like Manchester and Birmingham as in the British colonization case. The Mughals were not extracting Indian wealth and taking it to Persia. I just want to put that out clearly. I mean, the Indian wealth stayed in India, whether it went to Rajputs or the Marathas or whoever. The wealth stayed in India. Abbas, you have an objection to that? Go ahead.
Yeah, because see, we really need to understand the structure. of course, there were a lot of money which was needed to run the military, and even British did it. It's not the case that when you come with a so less bunch of people and you want to, such a vast stretch of land, you want to govern it, you need the local peoples to really run it. So that's where the money was being invested. And of course, because the condition of people was becoming miserable. So it means that definitely money was not being used by them, but where the money was going. So, there's a whole systematic.
But Indian government is still one of the largest employers of military, and most of the jobs in government state, and we are still spending a lot of money in that. So even in a democratic system, we are doing the same. A large part of our economic GDP is going towards maintaining one of the largest armies in the world.
No, I don't have any objection on that. What I am saying that right from beginning, like apart from that, see, that's all used, and where the chunk of the money goes, that still you suddenly the people start becoming poorer, which is being established about. Yes, of course.
But that's a question of economic governance and competence, right? The competence could be bad by Indian rulers as well, right? The southern rulers could also have been running. The Hindu rulers were also running incompetent empires, and so could be the Sikh rulers or the Ahom rulers or others. We're not here to discuss how good their governance was, but they were not exploitative by taking away Indian wealth to enrich another land. That is what I want to highlight, that another land was not being enriched at the expense of Indians.
Well, if I just, I will not deal with all the emperors. If I just state Babur right now, I'm picking from Baburnama, where he says that, suitable money gifts were bestowed from the treasury on the whole army to every tribe that was Afghan, Hazara, Arab, Baluch, etc., according to the position. Every trader, student, indeed and further he goes on to speak about the gold, and also he talks about the Samarkandi Bey's whom he is really transferring the money to in the initial days. And later on, we also have the record. So what I'm trying to say is that, it's not an attempt to paint anyone black or white or something, but the fact stays the way it is. That was a basic tendency of them. And there's nothing to.
No, but Babur was not the guy who had his roots in India, right? He had his roots outside. He still dreamt of going back and regaining his land. That dream was eventually dropped by his successors. They did not dream about going and recapturing Samarkand and becoming the rulers of Samarkand. They were emperors of Hindustan, and they had no interest in going in and taking Indian money and spending it in Uzbekistan, unless you tell me I'm wrong. But I don't think once they established the Hindustan Empire, they had any interest in enriching Uzbekistan over India.
No, because they didn't had any land to go back, and that's also always my argument that it's not very wise to say that they stayed back in India because they didn't have any land to go.
But the motives could be that I'm not saying they loved India.
No,
but I'm just saying they did not economically exploit India as a colonizer.
Well, see, you can't say that they exploited the extent that how the Europeans were doing. That case can definitely brought in, but to say that they didn't, because the Hajj windfall was amazing because all these guys had this desire of becoming the caliph. And a lot of money was invested to really, make the sharifs of Mecca happy. And these all are again on the records. Like, Akbar did it. And
I get your point. So they were spending money in establishing relationships with the Islamic centers of power, just like the United States. A large amount of money is goes to Vatican even till today. But let's get Dr. Shireen, because we're running out of time. Dr. Shireen Moosvi. Ma'am, I request you to address the point raised by Akbars that there was some extraction of wealth which was going towards Mecca in order to establish the Mughal position as sort of the leaders of Islamic world. There was some spending on that. And then other than that, ma'am, please conclude the discussion because we are sort of towards the end of the time.
So I'll first compliment you for saying most of the things which I wanted to be said. But the main thing you are now asking of, I don't think there was any money going to Makkah or to any Sharif in Makkah. I don't know which sources give this account. I haven't read it in Akbarnama. I haven't read it anywhere. So there will be some unique sources which are, in spite of knowing Persian and Shikas and going through all the Mughal sources, I couldn't get it. I fully agree with your point that the major thing is that all rulers rule for their benefit. Anyone hardly rules for the benefit of the people they govern. They only leave that means by which they can keep on getting their comforts. So the only difference is that It was not like the British, a colony from where money was at all going outside India. The first point which I would like to assert is this. Anyone can show me any evidence while money might have sent out of the country in any form. Akbar never sent any mission to Hajj. If anybody says that, let him quote the source. Which source is quoted? He was himself. Then the other thing is that the secular, we must realize that it is again a very difficult word to understand. Even Radhakrishnan couldn't understand. Our own president, whose knowledge I have all respect for, that secular doesn't mean no religion at all. It means state has no religion and everyone else has a total. And that was what was the period we have for Akbars. Right. We have for Ashoka, everybody has his own religion to himself. Under Akbar, everyone has his own religion to himself. I'm not talking about any other. As far as love for India is concerned, we only remember the last couplet of Bahadur Shah Zafar. Do gaz zameen na mili kuए yaar mein zafar, whose only lamentation was that he could have been buried not in Rangoon, but in India. If this was not love for the country, if not was the love for the motherland where all of them from Akbar onward were born, how can one say that I belong to another land, forgetting that he has been born, brought up, lived, and going to die in this country? And he is doing everything over here. So these are all misconceptions which, if one wants to keep or carry, one is of course have the freedom. It's a free country. Up till now, we think that we have the freedom at least to, if not even to say whatever we wish to. There started restriction even on that in various forms. So at least we have a free thinking, which we can think and we can have our own beliefs and our own concept of our own motherland and our own. So it's useless to argue if we decide to close our minds. Arguments or discussions are with open minds when I'm ready to agree with you and you are agreed to get me. I'm ready that you can convince me by arguments, not which are based on actual knowledge and actual information. So if only that much can remain there, I think my country, at least up till my death, will remain livable. But whatever it is, I'm still going to claim 2 yards in this land where no yogi or Modi can expel me. My land, and I'll be buried here.
Thank you, ma'am. The purpose of our platform is to encourage listening to differing point of views and putting your point of view and doing this all in a fact-based, rhetoric-free manner. So thank you to all of you for making this successful, and especially to you, Professor Moosvi, who managed to join us despite being very unwell right now. Ma'am, I hope you good health and hopefully you will recover soon. All the best, and thank you all of you for honoring our platform. We look forward to having you again in future.
Most welcome. I'd love to be with you.